Hello, everyone. So, this is going to be the lecture about Together. In case you want to write about Together for the essay, I wanted to give my thoughts on the movie, to give you some direction as to what you might write about. So, just to give a little intro, this movie was directed by someone who is basically unknown. His name is Michael Shanks, and he's an Australian filmmaker, and this is his feature film debut. And I must say, it was quite the debut. And it was distributed by Neon after premiering at the Sundance Film Festival. And it stars, of course, Dave Franco and Alison Brie, who are a couple in real life. So there is a meta aspect to it, and the film received positive reviews, and it has been the subject of discussion as to what it is saying about relationships and marriage, especially in our modern context. So we're going to explore the movie and what it has to say about these things. So, of course, before you can understand any text, you have to understand its context. So, this was released in 2025, so that would be the historical context. And the other bit of important context, I would say, would be the socio-cultural context, which broadly speaking would be 2020's dating culture. So I picked this image for this slide because I think it perfectly encapsulates what a lot of dating culture is like currently. We are seeing more instances of long distance relationships, and I mean, why wouldn't we? When we have social media that enables you to connect with someone on a very intimate level, even if you are hundreds or thousands of miles away from them physically. We are also seeing, because of social media, pressure to perform. That is, as a couple, post frequent, cute, oftentimes sappy, cringy, shallow posts together to show what a great couple you are, because social media has created a lot of pressure for you to have it together, no pun intended, in your relationship at all times, even though that is totally unrealistic, of course. And then we also have the fact that, generally speaking, relationships nowadays are more about love than stability, family rearing, or money. And I think the movie depicts that exactly, because we have Millie and Tim, who are not rich by any means. They're not poor, but they can't afford to get new phones when their phones get damaged in the cave, for example. So we know they aren't rich. They also, and why would they be, if only one of them has a steady job? And they also aren't planning on having kids. It seems like they're just with each other because they are in love, or at least in theory they are, and we'll talk more about that later. And then there is also the fact that people nowadays tend to be marrying older. A lot of people now wait until their 30s or later to get married, whereas in the past it was much more common to get married in your 20s or as a teenager, 18 or 19 even. But yeah, nowadays people wait. And I think we see that in the movie too, because Tim and Millie are in their 30s. The movie establishes. I think it mentions that Tim is 35, and we can assume Millie is around the same age. So they pretty much represent a modern couple. And even though they aren't married, a lot of people assume they are, which just goes to show that even though things have changed, socially speaking, when it comes to dating and marrying, those old traditions and expectations are still very much present in society. So there is a lot of pressure to marry still, in other words. That said, gender roles are de-emphasized a lot these days, and I think we see that too in the fact that Millie is the provider as opposed to Tim, the man, who is traditionally the provider, and Tim does the cooking, which is a traditionally feminine role, and we'll get into that later on, so let's keep going. So the movie has several symbols that it uses to help send its message, and I picked out 4 big ones. I won't go into detail with these, because if you're in the online class, there is a discussion board where you will be posting about these, and I of course want you to develop your own thoughts in the essay. But to just go over them quickly and in general, I think that bell is probably the biggest symbol. It's the symbol of the creepy chapel that has this cult that believes in fusing together with your partner. And the more I think about it, the more I think it makes sense that it's a bell. You have that saying, wedding bells are ringing. And of course, they have a pretty twisted version of marriage in that chapel, didn't they? Also, a bell, it has 2 parts that are inseparable. I don't exactly know the correct anatomical terms for bell anatomy, but you have the outer part of the bell and the thing inside that makes the sound. So the 2 parts are inseparable, which goes with the whole idea of being merged together with someone to where you can't separate. It also has the sun on it, and I think that might be a reference to the Greek myth that Jamie talks about, because in that myth there are people who were descended from the sun that had 2 faces and 4 arms and 4 legs before they were split in half. And those people descended from the sun were male people, and those descended from the earth were female people, and those descended from the moon were male female people. So I think there's a moon in there too, and maybe the earth. So I think that is probably what that means. Then we have the Rat King. There's actually a word for when you have rats tied together by their tails. And I think that has to do with how the couple are joined together like the rats are. And I think it also has to do with his father and mother, Tim's father and mother. So Tim's father, of course, died next to his mom, and that traumatized her because she lost her other half. And the rats are found in the ceiling by Tim, and no one knew they were there, and no one knew that something dead was lying somewhere in the house, which is the case with Tim's dad, who was lying dead in the bed without the mom knowing until she woke up. Then we have the pills, which I think are representative of trying to fix your relationship problems with a band-aid, I think is what Tim even refers to it at one point. instead of getting to the root of the problems in your relationship and what is causing the conflict. So I think that's what the muscle relaxant pills are about. And then we have the Spice Girls record, which I am leaning towards as more a negative than a positive symbol. It sort of represents how stalled their relationship is, Tim and Millie's, because Tim gave that to her early in the relationship, about 10 years ago, and since then he hasn't really done anything else for her, as her friend points out. So it shows that they're stuck and that they're in a cycle, and it ultimately ends with them being fused together at the end. So I tend to think of not Ice Spice, I am so sorry, that is the other movie. I tend to think of the Spice Girls album record as a negative symbol. I wanted to talk about the main characters for a bit. So our first main character is Tim, and he has a tragic backstory. He is haunted by his parents' death because his mom, he even directly says this, she lost her other half. And I think that might be what contributes to his codependency later on with Millie, because he is scared of facing a similar fate where he loses his other half, whom he believes is Millie, even though he simultaneously seems to believe that he is trapped by her. So it's a very unhealthy dynamic, and it is sort of his parents' death would be a harbinger of that. Tim is an aspiring musician, but it really isn't going anywhere, is it? He is not the provider of the family, which I hit upon previously, or the couple. Well, I mean, I guess a couple is a family, but he's not the provider because his job is very unstable, and I use that term job loosely. And even just look at his shirt, Party State. Gluttony, Madness. I don't even think this is a real college. Well, I know it's not. So Tim is all about the laissez-faire life of going from gig to gig, trying to become a rock star, even though that isn't very sustainable. He can't even drive, which, is wild. So he depends on Millie to drive him places, to drive him to the train station. And like I said before, he is the cook, so he fulfills a traditionally feminine role. So yes, he is not the alpha male or what have you. He is not the traditional provider in his relationship with Millie. And then we get to Millie, who also is not fulfilling the traditional roles of a woman in a relationship, and I think we see that most strikingly when she proposes to Tim at the very beginning. And it doesn't go too well. So that leads me now to the fact that, like Tim, she has a passion. Her passion is teaching, and Jamie even identifies it as a passion of hers. And she struggles to fulfill her passion, just like Tim struggles to fulfill his, because Tim is dependent on Millie, and Millie is the provider, and she feels like she has to make space for, she says, She says she feels like she has to make space for Tim's impossible dreams. She has to take care of Tim, and as such, that holds her back from pursuing her passion for teaching. And because she has to take care of Tim, she feels like his mother, which she even says at one point. So yes, because she has to take care of Tim, she neglects her own needs and her own passion, which is, of course, quite unhealthy. And then we have Jamie, who is a member of the New Age church, and he is pro-fusion. He is the antagonist of the movie. And he believes that fusion ends all dissonance, and that you'll be so warm together with your other half or what have you. But I wonder if Jamie is fully committed to the fusion. I wonder if he might have some regret, because we do see him in this scene, especially when he's talking to Millie. He says he misses his husband, and he even misses their fights or their dissonance, which is just a part, of being a couple after all. Good times and bads, ups and downs, but it's all worth it. So I wonder if it's a misery loves company sort of thing, where he wants to fuse Millie and Tim because he doesn't want to be alone in what he did. Because another bad thing about the fusion, I would say, is his husband's identity is totally gone. We know nothing of Jamie's husband, other than he is now fused with Jamie. So we have no idea who he was, or anything, what his interests or passions were, or anything like that. And I think even Jamie loses his passion, because he says passion, almost forgot what that's like, when he meets Millie at the school. So I'm not sold that he totally is okay with his decision to fuse, but I think he wants other people too, so he doesn't feel so alone. And it is interesting, we talked about how Tim and Millie don't really conform to gender roles. Of course he doesn't, because he's a gay man, so he's not confined by gender roles in the first place. But nonetheless, he seems to be confined, him and his husband, by the fusion. So I think the fusion is presented as a bad thing for everybody. And I did want to mention the mythological reference to Plato's Symposium, which Jamie refers to. So this dates back to 385 BC, and it includes a speech by Aristophanes in which he praises Eros, the god of sex and love. And in the speech, he describes these primal people who were made of two bodies that Zeus split in half because he feared their power but wanted worshippers. So yeah, we've pretty much covered that story. Something else I would add to it is the whole idea of platonic love, considering this is Plato. I'm sure y'all have heard this term before. Platonic love is love that is beyond romantic love, love that is deeper than sex and attraction. And of course, under the curse, where Tim and Millie start to fuse, it seems to be about nothing but attraction, now that I think about it. So it seems like the people who want that church that wants people to fuse are misguided. So yes, what they end up becoming in the end doesn't seem to be true love. Because the whole point of that symposium was these different people. Aristophanes, for example, was a comedic playwright, talking about love and trying to determine what real, true love really is. I also thought it was worth noting that Tim and Millie also seem to represent. They are similar to Adam and Eve in that they're kind of an inversion of Adam and Eve, actually, I would say. So in Adam and Eve, the story from the Bible, of course, Eve comes out of Adam's side. She is made from his rib. And it's sort of the opposite in Together, because Millie is joined together with Tim. Also, Tim is the one who first partakes of the forbidden fruit, which I think is represented by the water in the cave that brings about the curse. And of course, just like in Genesis, after he partakes, a curse happens. Just like after Eve partakes of the fruit, a curse happens. So I do think they are sort of an inversion of Adam and Eve, and I think that all culminates in the end when they become one flesh, but in the most gruesome and negative way. I think that ending really is supposed to be a dark, tragic ending. So that leads me to this question. Is the movie pro-marriage or anti-marriage? Because I honestly am a bit torn, but if I had to decide, I would say that the film is not anti-marriage per se, but has some critiques of traditional marriage. So, of course, Tim and Millie's dynamic is not very healthy, I would say, when they are a provider girlfriend and a stay-at-home boyfriend. Even before the curse, we can see that they are not on steady ground as a couple. But when it doesn't seem to be that is their undoing, the fact that they're a non-traditional couple in that they don't follow traditional gender roles and are not married. But I don't think that's their undoing. I think their undoing is that they decide to become more traditional, quote-unquote, because Tim fixes, quote-unquote, the error at the beginning of Millie proposing when he proposes at the end. And after he proposes, they go back to the quote-unquote good old days and put on the Spice Girls record and don't move forward at all. They don't develop at all. They just push everything down and they merge together and lose their separate identities and their separate passions. So I think the film is saying that traditional marriage can be like that, which is not a good thing. But in terms of their dynamic, I would say what the movie seems to be saying is they shouldn't have been together, you know? Maybe they weren't working as a couple, but they tried to force themselves to work, perhaps because of societal pressures, you know, to get married or what have you, when they weren't meant to be together in the first place. That's what I think, at least. And I think I basically said everything that's in my final thoughts. That traditional marriage, according to the movie, seems to say that it can be suffocating. And it seems to also say that it's valid to be single and pursue your goals separately, rather than force yourself to be with someone, even if you don't need to be. You don't necessarily, I suppose, have that other half, like the cult in the movie insists that you do. Sometimes it's okay to be your own person. I think that's something else the movie might be getting at. But yes, I think overall we can definitely say that it provides important insights into modern dating culture, in terms of toxic versus positive relationships, and whether you need to be in a relationship at all to be valid, because sometimes you don't need to be. Alright, and that is what I would say about Together. Hopefully that gave y'all some ideas about what you might write about, and I will see you next time.
Please comment the answers to or email me the answers to the following questions. 1. What is one way that Tim and Millie do not fit traditional gender roles? 2. What work by Plato is referenced in the film? 3. In the video, Tim and Millie are compared to what two biblical figures?